After leaving the confines of Hammerfall City, Zhang Yi and others truly saw the living conditions of ordinary people in this world. The purpose of Zhang Yi and the others' trip was Count Nefra. This guy was originally the leader of the Mafia Nefala family. Later, he acquired ion energy and transformed into a super criminal. Not only did he have superhuman strength and speed, he could also fly, and even it can also fire laser beams from its eyes. It's like a weakened version of the Kryptonian sense of déjà vu. Zhang Yi believed that the energy drawn from him would definitely replenish the time controller with a lot of power. Since the victory of the criminals, Count Nefra has semi-retired. If Barton hadn't mentioned it, Zhang Yi would have ignored this guy. Thanks to Eagle Eye's intelligence, it became easier for Zhang Yi to move with these targets, and among these targets was the Moonstone. Zhang Yi remembered that the Moonstone was also a member of the Thunder Agents, and at the same time it is also one of the targets of Hawkeye's revenge on this trip. In other words, if his speed is fast enough, maybe the two parties can meet at the location of the Moonstone. This road is not easy to walk on. The original towns have long since disappeared and turned into independent small towns scattered on the map. But it's not easy to stop there because you can't be sure if there are any living people in that town. The wide and flat roads have also become a source of income for gangsters to collect tolls. Ordinary people who want to travel far here can only take the mountain trails and sleep in the hills and graves. But these places seem to be 100 times more dangerous than the gang's territory. No one can be sure who the eyes staring at him in the darkness belong to. After climbing over Mount Shamutam, what we saw was a small village located at the foot of a barren mountain. Zhang Yi is not sure whose territory this is, but judging from the appearance of the village, this poor place does not seem worthy of the patronage of gangsters. Looking from a distance, the village is surrounded by wooden fences. The houses erected here have no beauty at all, and there is no lighting at all. They may even be built haphazardly, because Zhang Yi saw many of the roofs of the houses were all leaking, and one even collapsed in half. The road from the barren mountain to the village is winding and rugged, with no grass growing on the road. Everything seems so desolate. Only the cultivated fields in the village have some crops as embellishments, making the place seem to have a trace of life. Zhang Yi and the other three wore robes and hid their faces under their hoods. After exchanging glances with each other, they slowly entered the village. There is no such thing as a gate in the village. There is only a wooden sign stuck in the ground, with the name Daphnia Village crookedly engraved on it. It took Zhang Yi a long time to recognize it. The reason was that one of the letters was written wrong. It can be seen that the cultural level here is low. After entering the village, Zhang Yi and the others soon attracted the attention of the local residents. But it's just a matter of attention. They were doing farm work in the fields and just watched from a distance. No one wanted to come over to talk, and no one tried to get close to Zhang Yi and others. They just watched. There was extreme vigilance and numbness in his eyes. Zhang Yi couldn't see any humanity in them. They were like a group of programmed NPCs, and they were like walking zombies, lifeless. Is this really the future world? Pietro sighed sincerely. This is the regression of civilization brought about by the wasteland era. Here, everything will undergo earth-shaking changes. Those in power have the greatest resources in their hands, and they can eat and drink without worries, and enjoy themselves as much as they want. But for ordinary people, this place is different from the prehistoric era. There is no difference. Zhang Yi said quietly. Originally, Zhang Yi was thinking about whether he could collect some supplies from this village, because he didn't have much fresh water resources in his hand. Although he didn't have any money, he did have some fast food that he could exchange for. But now, Zhang Yi gave up this idea. Looking at these villagers who could barely survive, he just wanted to leave here as soon as possible. While passing a house, a child caught Kara's attention. It was a little girl who looked to be no more than 4 or 5 years old. Her body was dirty, her clothes were a little torn, her bare feet were scarred, and she had calluses that shouldn't exist at her age. The house she was in had been seen before Zhang Yi and the others came in. It was the dilapidated house with half of the roof collapsed. When they got closer, they realized that this place was worse than they imagined, because not only the roof, but the entire house didn't even have a door. There was also a big hole in the wall. From the gap, Zhang Yi and the others could clearly see the situation inside the house. There was a younger boy inside. When Zhang Yi and the others looked inside the house, the little girl also saw Zhang Yi and the others. I wonder if it was the first time they saw outsiders. The little girl looked extremely frightened. Her big eyes were full of fear. The little girl seemed to want to find a place to hide, but unfortunately, the house was too dilapidated and there was no place for her to hide. Seeing this, Kara's fists gradually clenched. Zhang Yi understood that Kara was thinking of her and her brother, but he couldn't comfort him about this kind of thing and could only let her come out on her own. Stopping, Kara took out a piece of candy from her pocket. After taking 2 steps forward, a smile slowly formed on her stiff face, trying hard to show kindness to the little girl. Seeing this scene, the little girl was stunned. Maybe this was the first time she saw this expression. I don't know how long it took, but the little girl checked her heart and limped out with feet covered with scars. She was like a little deer, the slightest fright would cause her to flee back to her little house and never open her heart to outsiders again. Kara kept holding the candy in her hand, looking at the little girl getting closer and closer, the smile on her face gradually filled up. The little girl gently took the candy from Kara's hand, and then showed a big smile to Kara. This is the smile she should have at her age. Then, the little girl ran all the way back to the dilapidated house. Under Kara's surprised eyes, the little girl slowly walked out with a bowl of water. Perhaps, this was the only thing she treasured. The appearance of the bowl is very shabby, giving people an unclean feeling, but the water inside is very pure, without any debris. Taking the bowl, Kara smiled slightly. She couldn't describe her inner feelings at this time. She only felt that her heart ached, and at the same time she wanted to lament the injustice of the world. Just when Kara raised her hand to take a sip of water, her arm was suddenly grabbed. Kara turned around and saw Zhang Yi's calm face hidden under the brim of his hat. And an indifferent sigh. The water is poisonous. Outside the Hammer City, there is a riot of flowers. Eyeball Man's nightclub has a special guest today. Dark clouds covered the full moon in the sky, and the stars in the sky disappeared at this time. In this strange atmosphere, an old man wearing a windbreaker and a top hat was walking in the dark. He was once a mercenary hired by Kingpin, and he has fought against most superheroes. 45 years have passed, and the skills in his hands are not unfamiliar at all. Now he is a marshal under the Red Skull. He is also the executioner who scares countless people in the wasteland. He is Bullseye. Following in the footsteps of old Barton, Bullseye came to Eyeball Man's nightclub. Looking at the building in front of him, Bullseye's lips trembled slightly, and his only eye was a little dry. He took a long breath and slowly calmed down his rapid heartbeat. He's had enough. He is a warrior who yearns to challenge the strong. He's tired of decades of inaction, he's tired of helping the Red Skull with those chores, he's tired of living without superheroes. After so many years, no superhero has appeared in the entire wasteland. No one has raised Thor's hammer to declare war on evil. Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman have not been able to come out of the time stream. The descendants of those superheroes, now it has become a waste that is worse than a wild dog on the roadside. His wanton actions did not cause anyone to stop him. All he got was the emptiness after madness. But it's all finally coming to an end. After observing the scene where Hawkeye killed the clone, old Bullseye's heart gradually became hot. Finally, there was finally a superhero, and there was finally someone who could let him taste the beauty of the past. This was an important moment for Bullseye and the most important fight of his life. Slowly arriving in front of the colorful door, Bullseye could clearly hear the singing and dancing inside. He believed that the Eyeball Man would tell him the whereabouts of Hawkeye. When he opened the door, he was greeted by loud music and dazzling lights, causing Bullseye to unconsciously smile. "Hello, welcome to Ranhua Mayan, please come in." The enthusiastic waiter took the initiative to greet her. She was a girl wearing Scarlet Witch clothes. She had an excellent figure, and her every move was particularly eye-catching, as if she was a seductive monster. But for Bullseye, this couldn't make him feel any fluctuation at all. He raised his head and was about to speak. The next moment, Bullseye froze on the spot, and the expression on his face instantly froze. Under the reflection of the light, the girl's darkened face was covered with blood. Her enthusiastic smile was more like an exquisite remains at the moment. The thick blood had long dried up and turned into jet black, clinging to the girl's face. On the skin. Bullseye only felt that his brain was a little dazed. He subconsciously prepared to capture the opponent, but his heart told him that there was no danger here. Blinking his eyes rapidly, Bullseye took 2 steps back silently. "Sir." The waitress tilted her head, seeming a little confused about Bullseye's movements. Bullseye didn't answer. He first raised his hand and covered his mechanical eyeball. The next moment, all the blood stains on the girl's body disappeared, and she turned into a normal girl, waiting enthusiastically. Bullseye's response. Then, Bullseye put down his hand and slowly closed his eyes. In an instant, the girl in front of him disappeared. Under the vision of the mechanical eyeball, the originally flickering hall became extremely dim, and everything was covered with a black veil. Although the music in his ears was still loud, Bullseye felt that it was unusually dead inside. Lifting his steps, Bullseye walked in without any obstruction. You can't see your fingers in the hall, but Bullseye, who has a mechanical eyeball with night vision function, has not lost his field of vision. Dozens of corpses are lying scattered in the hall, which is dazzled by flowers. They maintain the posture of their lives stiffly, and they are no longer there. Take a breath. The mechanical eyeballs were blocked again, and the dazzling lights appeared again. On the stage, beautiful girls were pole dancing to the dynamic beat, showing off their charm wantonly. Under the stage, drunken mercenaries were gathered in groups, and bursts of laughter were heard from time to time. The entire nightclub was in a cheerful atmosphere. Taking off his hand, a scene of dead bodies came into view again. Bullseye's heart moved, and he was sure that he had entered an illusion at this time, where someone slaughtered everyone present, and then left magic runes behind, keeping the place as it was before. Originally, he was still speculating whether this place might be the work of Mysterio's hallucinogenic machine, but he quickly rejected this conjecture. Worried that Mysterio would use the same method as Wolverine to attack him, Red Skull secretly executed Mysterio early in the morning, and all the things in his hands were completely destroyed by Hydra. There would be absolutely no trace of anything. Legacy. Moreover, Mysterio's phantom belongs to technology. Strictly speaking, it can completely deceive his mechanical eyeballs, but the environment here is different. The illusion for ordinary people is more like the product of magic or witchcraft. Magic. Bullseye was playing with a coin he saw on the table, feeling a little curious in his heart. It stands to reason that magic should not exist in the area controlled by the Red Skull. Even those pagans who study and worship black magic usually hide in the mountains and forests. No one should be so bold and dare to do it in a city so far away. It's only right to start from such a close place. Moving his footsteps, Bullseye inspected the blood-stained scene. His brain was spinning rapidly, trying to reconstruct the events of the murder. His eyes were empty and his expression was dull. He was killed suddenly, but the method of killing was a cut rather than a gunshot wound. This shows that the attacker's movements were very fast, so fast that he could not make any reaction at all, and the attacker the route is. Bullseye turned his head slightly, changed his gaze, and then followed the trail of blood until it reached the table in a corner. That's where the attacker is. Lowering his head, what came into view was a strong man who was torn in half. He was torn apart by a huge force. His upper body was not far from the door, but his lower body was 5 meters away. The attacker was very powerful, much more powerful than I imagined. This should not be the work of the same person, but there is no way of confirming this. Maybe his ability is better. There were more clues at the scene than Bullseye had expected. The perpetrator did not seem to have any intention of hiding himself. In other words, the other party felt that the magic left here was enough to deal with other people. After all, there were all old customers here and the flow of people was not large. After walking and walking, Bullseye paused again in front of a corpse that was electrocuted into charcoal. His fingers lightly touched the surface of the corpse, and then he crushed some black substance, put it in front of his nose and smelled it. The pungent smell penetrated into the nasal cavity, sobering up Bullseye's brain a lot. High voltage current. But it's not natural thunder and lightning. It should rule out Thor's hammer or magic. Compared with these supernatural and strange abilities, this is more like a technological product. Science and technology. Magic? Bullseye was really curious now. It was not easy to do these things on the surface today. Back then, the weapons and equipment of the superheroes were basically divided up by the super criminals. Almost nothing was circulated. Even if there was, it should be firmly in the hands of gangs everywhere. But what happened here? No matter how you look at it, it doesn't look like a gang vendetta, but more like a superhero acting for justice. After all, Eyeball Man played a lot of role behind that battle. If Eyeball Man hadn't informed the Red Skull of the hero's weaknesses, the battle probably wouldn't have gone as smoothly as the villains expected. Bullseye noticed Eyeball Man's body early on. He died in the innermost part of the nightclub, with a huge hole on his chest. It seemed like someone had taken something out of Eyeball Man's body alive. The eye of the observer. That's not a good thing, but for this wasteland, it is something that can work miracles, so the attacker's purpose should be confirmed. As he pondered, Bullseye's breathing became rapid. The target of the massacre is the eye of the observer. They want to reenact the battle of that year and use this eyeball to find weaknesses in the Red Skull or me. His gaze shifted, and his bullseye glanced over the corpses one after another. There are at least 4 attackers, one of them is very fast and has a sharp weapon. However, the shape of the weapon cannot be determined yet, but the blade is not large and it should be something similar to a dagger. The other has huge power and can tear a strong adult in half. This kind of power is definitely not something ordinary superhumans can possess. The specific superpower cannot be determined. I don't know if it is an unregistered new variant. People. The third person should have a high-tech product in his hand that can release a powerful electric current in an instant. This is somewhat similar to the technology of the whip rope, but there are too many similar things to distinguish it. It is impossible to guess whether it comes from relics of superheroes or criminals. As for the last person, he must be a wizard. His attainments in this kind of magic and witchcraft are no worse than those of some famous heroes. There is a high probability that he is the leader of these people. Bullseye looked around, eliminating his inner doubts one by one, and finally came to a conclusion that made him ecstatic. This is actually the work of a superhero. This conclusion made him laugh uncontrollably. His whole face was extremely ferocious, looking extremely crazy in the dark environment. At the same time, his figure also looked extremely strange in this bloody venue. Old Bullseye knelt down, stretched out his palms that were shaking with excitement, and slowly touched the dried blood on the ground. This cannot be accomplished by one or two heroes. He thought. This is a team of superheroes. Right here, right under the nose of the Red Skull, they act professionally. Unlike that old loser Hawkeye, this is an emerging superhero organization that has not been discovered by anyone before. Bullseye never dreamed that by following Eagle Eye's footsteps, he would find such a big surprise, and most importantly, only he knew about this discovery. Priority call incoming call. Priority call incoming call. Dot. Bullseye frowned. The caller ID of the mechanical eyeball ruined his good mood. Without too much thinking, Bullseye already knew who the other party was. There is only one person in the world who can have priority authority. Priority call, beep. Hello. When the call was connected, Bullseye opened his chapped lips and let out a sigh. Why are my calls being ignored? The Red Skull appeared in the electronic eye's visual display. After so many years, the Red Skull still hasn't aged. Judging from the background opposite, the Red Skull should be in his office at the moment. I've been busy. Bullseye spoke, he didn't want to talk too much. Now for Bullseye, the most critical issue should be the whereabouts of this superhero organization, rather than playing playhouse with Red Skull. He is tired of his previous life, and now he wants to act for his own goals. Busy. The Red Skull was a little unhappy, or he had been suppressing his anger. It was obvious that Bullseye's behavior of ignoring his orders made the Red Skull very angry. The Underlanders are devouring my miners in the mud. These filthy monsters have sunk a town underground before. You know what a commotion this can cause. I have no time for your personal quirks. I need you to take care of them, this. Go find someone else. Bullseye replied bluntly, without even thinking too much about it. In other words, he maintains the same attitude towards any order given by the Red Skull. I am not the only mercenary you have, and I still have some important things to do. Bullseye said indifferently, he didn't care about Red Skull's feelings. As for the superhero team that once appeared here, he would not mention a word to the Red Skull, because this is his prey and he will never allow others to get involved. Other people. The Red Skull's expression darkened, and his stern face exuded huge pressure. He looked directly at the Bullseye in the picture with a slightly murderous gaze, and his tone was frightening. You serve me, Bullseye. Drop. The call has been hung up. Not this time, skeleton. Bullseye had a mocking sneer on his face. He doesn't owe the Red Skull anything, and he's not his subordinate. The two have a cooperative relationship from beginning to end. Now that Bullseye has finally found what's most important to him, it's natural that he can't give up just yet. Technology, magic, superpowers suspected of being mutants, and extremely powerful soldiers. This reminds me of the happy life in the past, and some old friends. Taking a deep breath, Bullseye felt comfortable all over. He hadn't been so happy for a long time. The last time I was so happy was when I discovered Eagle Eye's murder scene. But now. Hawkeye. What it is. Compared to that old waste, there are more delicious things here waiting for you to taste. This is far from what Hawkeye can match. If he acts properly, he will kill an entire team of superheroes. This kind of pleasure is not comparable to killing a Hawkeye. When he thought of that scene, Bullseye's hands began to tremble uncontrollably. It was the muscle memory brought about by excitement. He had not felt this intoxicating feeling for decades. Slowly exhaling the air from his lungs, Bullseye reopened his eyes. I hope you can satisfy me. Walking on the dirt road in the barren mountains, Zhang-Yi and the others were following the unclear blood stains scattered on the rocks, looking for an unknown existence. It was a tragedy they discovered when they passed by a farm. Initially, no one wanted to get close to it, but Carla's keen sense of smell smelled the stench of corpses. It was estimated that there was no one alive there, so Zhang-Yi decided to help them sort it out. A relic. In this desolate area, death does not seem to be a particularly surprising thing. The farm was littered with corpses, which made people shudder. There were several corpses on the ground that had been eaten clean. When Zhang-Yi and the others approached, several vultures were frightened and flew high, but they did not leave. Just stopped on the dry old tree outside the farm. The vultures' eyes stared straight at the three strangers, as if curious about what these humans who had interrupted their feeding wanted to do. After a simple investigation, it was found that all 7 members of the farm family died violently, and nothing in the house was missing. It seemed that the murderer came specifically to eat them. Pietro speculated whether wild animals might have attacked them, such as brown bears, but Zhang-Yi didn't think so. There were indeed many rare and exotic animals in this wasteland world, but judging from this tragic scene, there is a high probability that this was made by wild intelligent creatures. There is a family of 7 on the farm. This can be clearly seen in their family photos. There is also a specially prepared baby room in the home. It seems that they live a solitary but peaceful and happy life. God knows this kind of tragedy. Why did it happen to them? Maybe they were unlucky. Zhang Yi said. In this degenerated and twisted world, no one can survive alone, and death may be a good thing for them. Immediately afterwards, when they were preparing to collect the corpses for them to bury, Zhang-Yi and others suddenly discovered that there were not many corpses at the scene. There were 7 people in total, but there were only 5.5 at the scene. This shows that the murderer packed them for himself. Ordered 1. Relying on Kara's 5 senses that were different from ordinary people, the 3 of them quickly found the blood stains left outside, and followed the blood stains dripping every few dozen meters into the mountains. However, Kara's expression was not very good along the way. Still thinking about that little girl? Zhang Yi spoke, and the team needed to have proper communication. Zhang Yi didn't want to see Kara being troubled by this. You know, although Kryptonians are extremely hard and invulnerable, their hearts are very soft. Kara said nothing, just lowered her head and hurried on. Kara, I can't guarantee how important I am to you, but I should be considered one of the people you trust most, right? Zhang Yi moved closer to Kara. So if there is anything you don't have to hold in your heart, you can talk about it. Hearing this, Kara paused, and after being silent for a while, she finally spoke slowly. I just can't figure it out. What's going on in this world? I can't understand anything now. What should it be like? Why would a little girl do something like repaying kindness with revenge? There's nothing in her mind. Conscience. Can she still be worthy of being a person? I really can't accept it. In the past, on our planet Krypton, some senior elders had studied many civilized topics and written several post-apocalyptic books. They described in detail how civilization would become after being baptized. Dark and unbearable, but me. But I think that's just a story. Can you understand? That's just a story, that shouldn't happen. The heart of every human being should be kind and bright. No matter how dark the world is, there are always people who dare to be the light chasers, because hope is still there, it exists. In everyone's heart. But here I am. I really. Zhang Yi raised his hand, hesitated for a moment, and then put his arm around Kara's shoulder. Feeling powerless, right? After a long sigh, Zhang Yi pursed his lips and looked at Kara, who had her head lowered. Although she couldn't see her expression, Zhang Yi believed that he could understand her current mood. Do you feel particularly empty and powerless in your heart? Do you not understand why this society has become so cruel? Do you doubt whether you still need to save them? Zhang Yi glanced at Pietro next to him. Perhaps Pietro had a deeper understanding of this topic. Don't doubt yourself, Kara. The reason why you are in trouble and get into trouble in your heart is because you were wrong from the beginning. You are kind-hearted, you have hope, and you still treat them as people. But they are no longer human. Zhang Yi shook his head slightly and continued. Don't talk about those empty words about those who chase the light. Those who rush into the darkness shouting about friendship, bonds, and the future. They only exist in ideals and are an excuse for the weak to place their hopes on others. They want to be saved, but they don't want the person they sacrifice to be themselves. You said there will always be people looking for hope, but when people can no longer even afford the most basic food and clothing, do you think hope is still important to these people? Can they still be considered human beings? I don't know. Kara murmured, her voice like a mosquito. Then go find the answer yourself. Pietro and I will always be with you. Zhang Yi patted Carla's shoulder gently. Yes, we are family. Pietro also said. Although Pietro knew that he was too clumsy to participate in such things as making sense, this did not mean that he did not understand Carla. After all, he himself came from a world of despair similar to this one. The 3 of them walked all afternoon and finally arrived at the murderer's base camp before the sun set. It was a cave located on a cliff. The cave was more than 20 meters above the ground. At the bottom of the cliff, countless bones that had been chewed were left on the ground. Inside were not only human bones, but also the bones of some large beasts. Zhang Yi even saw the skeletal structure of a mammoth, which shows how extensive hunting is that exists here. That thing should be inside, let me go. Kara took a deep breath and temporarily threw away all the worries in her heart. She kneaded her fingers and made a click-click sound. Be safe. Zhang Yi did not refuse Kara's request to fight. After what happened in the previous village, Kara had been holding back for too long. At this time, she needed something to let her vent. After thinking for a while, Zhang Yi added another sentence. Pay attention to the safety of the other party. I only have one requirement to absorb the energy from that thing, and that is that I need him to be alive. Don't bring out a bowl of meat sauce all at once. I can't handle that. Chidian Boy's best-selling list is in the top 100. Although I didn't get much because of the first release of Genesis, the brothers really scared me. Thanks to your love, I also experienced the experience of fighting with gods. Good books are hard work. I will present you with a real and weird heroic world. I hope you can't help but read it. This will make it more enjoyable. Slowly arriving in front of the hill composed of countless bones, Kara stopped. She raised her head and looked at the location of the cave. The distance is about 60 meters and the height is more than 20 meters. For ordinary people, to cross this distance, they may need the help of some tools, but for Kara, it only requires a jump and a good look. Under the illumination of this bold sun, Kara has almost lost her previous powerful figure. At this time, she can no longer control the biological position, but the remaining energy still makes her different from ordinary people. The soles of her feet slammed down on the ground, and Kara's whole body ejected, smashing into the cave at an extremely fast speed and fiercely. Yes, just smash it in. Kara didn't think Go Xing's presence here could hurt her, and she didn't care if she would alert the snake. At this moment, she had only one goal, and that was to pull out this monster hiding in the dark corner and beat it up. The cave was extremely dark, but to the Kryptonian's perspective this was nothing. The scene you see is all the flesh and blood remaining on the ground. This seems to be the place where the thing eats. There are some slopes on the ground that can allow the blood scattered on the ground to flow out along the landslide. The thing even dug a ditch specially. As a sewage ditch. There were some cages placed in the open space next to them. They were made by something bending steel with great strength. There were also some rags and pieces of clothes inside. Kara knew what these things were used for without thinking about them. Blood dried on the floor of the cave, dyeing the place black and red. The breath of death filled the air. The further inside, the disgusting rotten smell became more obvious. It was hard to imagine what existed here. Weird stuff. The only sound in the entire cave was Kara's breathing, and the smell that was unbearable to ordinary people. If it were an ordinary person, he would have been frightened when he walked here, but Kara was not. At this moment, there was only endless anger in her heart. Closing her eyes, Kara was silent for a moment. She believed that her rude act of breaking the door just now must have disturbed the creature inside, and it was still here, even if it did not dare to come out and face her. After a while, Kara opened her eyes. Got you. Gradually clenching her fists, Kara rushed in without any hesitation. In the deepest part of the cave, Kara saw her target, who was also the initiator of the tragedies committed nearby. It was a humanoid creature. No, strictly speaking, it could no longer be called a human. It was covered with long hair, and had a thick fleshy tail behind it. Its eyes were glowing red, and it was staring at it intently. Looking at the intruder in front of him. The monster seemed to know that it had been discovered. Its heartbeat was very fast, and its saliva accumulated at the corner of its mouth and turned into white foam. It let out a short and rapid growl, trying to intimidate Kara's progress. Kara only felt disgusted, and she even thought this thing would dirty her hands. Just when she was about to charge up her heat vision. Suddenly, something stuck on the wall in the corner of the cave caught Kara's attention. That's a batarang. The monster trembled and stared at Kara, but the vigilance against danger and the fear of natural enemies in the beast's genes made it dare not make any resistance at all. It stared at the furious Kara in front of her with a pair of red and frightened eyes. But what makes it strange is that the devastating attack did not come. The female human actually stopped. Judging from the expression, the other party must have seen something and fell into deep thought. Following Kara's gaze, it soon discovered the thing that caused all these changes, which was the dart weapon inserted into the rock wall of its cave. Its sticky mind began to work, and a not-so-clear memory gradually emerged. It remembered this history. The owner of this dart hurt himself. He used this thing to cut his neck. If it weren't for his strong defense and self-healing abilities, he would probably die in the hands of that strange human being. But fortunately, I survived. And this also means that the guy is going to be miserable. Although he couldn't defeat that human being, people living in this miserable world would always have their flaws exposed. Maybe he fell into a deep sleep, maybe he was infected with germs, or maybe he was targeted by other hunters. That was the furthest tracking I had ever carried out. In order to kill the human who dared to hurt me, I went through a months-long pursuit, and the distance even spanned 2 continents. But it's all worth it. That guy is hurt, that guy is going to die. Thinking of this, a ferocious smile appeared on its ugly face involuntarily. It stretched out its tongue and licked its lips, as if savoring the sweetness of human flesh and blood. Next moment. A huge force hit, and it only felt the world spinning, and then there was a burning pain on its back. It opened its mouth and wanted to scream, but the delicate little hands on its neck were as dead as steel. It was so embedded in its neck that it became difficult for it to breathe. What have you done? Kara gritted her teeth, her eyes filled with destructive energy. Ouch. Ah. The humanoid monster struggled, but its resistance was as cute as a baby. In Kara's memory, there were not many people who used strange weapons like bat darts. There was only one person, and that person was one of the people who saved him in the previous world, and he was a good person. Kara has known from a long time ago that there are countless worlds in the multiverse. They are connected to each other but distinct. Traveling through the multiverse is not an easy task, and traveling through the big world is even more difficult. There shouldn't be any batarangs here. This should be a world without Metropolis, without Gotham City, without Kryptonians, and without Batman. Kara didn't expect that she would see this, in this world, in this cave. And this may only mean one thing. Staring at the blood stains remaining on the batarang, Kara felt the corners of her eyes twitching unconsciously, and slowly turned her gaze back to the ugly monster in front of her, watching it continue to struggle. Kara's fist hardened. Boom! The huge cracking sound tore through the silence of the next night and echoed in the valley. Outside the cave, Pietro, who was urinating, was startled by the sudden loud noise. Unlike Pietro, who was frightened, Zhang-Yi frowned slightly. Although he has not known Kara for a particularly long time, based on Zhang-Yi's understanding of her, although Kara does seem to be reckless at ordinary times, she is by no means a girl who is easily fooled. Perhaps it is because she comes from a family with the S symbol that symbolizes hope. Kara rarely uses all her strength during actions. She usually reserves some strength subconsciously, because for her, the world is too fragile. But now, judging from the loud noise and destructive power just now, if Kara hadn't fallen into extreme anger, then it meant that the monster inside might not be so easy to deal with. Zhang, would you like me to go in and take a look? I feel something is wrong. This world is too bad. We don't know the specific situation here. Kara is not as powerful as before. What if she encounters danger? Pietro came to Zhang Yi's side. He was really scared and broke out in a cold sweat just now. He originally thought that there would be nothing in this cave that could threaten Carla, but now, Pietro was not sure. Hearing this, Zhang Yi did not answer immediately. He first cast his gaze at the entrance of the cave, then narrowed his eyes and tried his best to extend his 5 senses to judge the situation inside. After the loud noise, there was an eerie calm inside the cave. It was quiet under the entire cliff, not even the chirping of insects or birds. The cool breeze blew in, blowing the smoke and dust on the ground, creating a cyclone in the air, making it look extremely desolate and dead. Pietro couldn't wait any longer. As an orphan since he was a child, he had always longed for family affection, and he had long regarded Carla as his biological sister, so without knowing the specific situation, he was very worried about Carla's safety. Zhang, did you hear that? Pietro spoke again. Kara is fine. She is not as weak as you think. Rather than this, I am worried about the thing inside. Zhang Yi said calmly. According to his judgment, the loud noise was the result of Kara's full force, and from their judging from the quiet environment, the other party must have no ability to resist. But at the same time, Zhang Yi was also confused about what happened in the cave, or what Kara saw that made her fall into extreme anger in an instant. The most likely thing that Zhang Yi could think of was that the thing inside had done something unnatural, such as raising some humans in captivity and using them as food rations. This may indeed make people angry, especially for Kara, a kind and simple Kryptonian, but Zhang Yi always felt that things were far from that simple. Kara did not let Zhang Yi and Pietro wait too long. After a while, the two of them saw Kara walking to the entrance of the cave. In her hand, she was dragging a man covered with brown hair. Weird creatures. Kara first waved her arm and dropped the monster in her hand. The long-haired monster drew an arc in the air, and then fell heavily to the ground. The thing did not react at all during the whole process, and it was unknown whether it was alive or dead. Then Kara jumped down and landed firmly next to the monster, leaving a pair of clear footprints on the ground. Is this a monster that has been hunting humans? It looks really ugly, and it smells so bad. Don't you know how to wash this thing yourself? It's so disgusting. Pietro saw that Carla was safe and sound, and his hanging heart gradually relaxed, and then he turned his attention to the unconscious monster. This thing used to be a human being. I can see some similarities from his mutated bones. Carla's expression was grim. He used to be a human. Pietro was shocked. He couldn't imagine how a being that was originally a human could become like this, and he also incorporated the same kind of people from the past into the recipe. Suddenly, Pietro thought of something, and he couldn't help but speak. Zhang, do you think this guy is a mutant? Just like the guys in the mutant prison. Seeing the sharp change in the expression on Pietro's face, Zhang Yi shook his head slightly, then took 2 steps forward and carefully observed the appearance of the strange creature. There has never been such a mutant in my memory. I'm not sure if he is a mutant, but I don't think he looks like it. Pietro nodded thoughtfully, then raised his hand to fan his nose and spoke. Mutants are all kinds of weird. I don't think it's unusual to see any kind of mutation. But if this guy is really a mutant, then he must be a rat man. Look at his disgusting appearance, his tail, and the clothes on his body. The smell is as repulsive as a rat in the gutter. Rat people. He does not mean that. Zhang Yi carefully pondered the term in his mind, and then he seemed to have deduced some clues from it. In his memory, the so-called rat people did exist in the Marvel Universe. I may know his identity. Zhang Yi said slowly. This guy is indeed not a mutant, but a product of genetic modification, mutated from humans. His original name should be Edward, and he is one of Spider-Man's enemies. Thanks to mental training, Zhang Yi's memory of his past life can be made clearer, otherwise he might not be able to remember this little-known guy. Genetic modification. It's even more disgusting. Pietro made a retching motion. I thought criminals would have a better future after victory. Why did this guy become like this? As far as I know, the alliance between the gang of criminals was not strong, not to mention that the resources at that time were not enough to be distributed to all the criminals, so the Red Skull naturally drove away many uninfluenced guys. He should be considered one of them. Zhang Yi replied. Can you still extract energy from him? I think he is almost dead. Pietro asked. Kara, on the other hand, spoke silently. He wasn't dead, he just fainted from shock. Yes, I can feel the vitality on his body. Zhang Yi confirmed Kara's statement. The vitality of this thing is quite tough. He can hear the weak heartbeat of the other person. But even so, Zhang Yi doesn't think he can give it to him. How much power does the time controller charge? Better than nothing belonging is. But more than this, I'm more curious about another thing. Kara, what did you see inside? Zhang Yi's expression was solemn. He looked directly at Kara, who still looked bad, and asked gently. Hearing this, Kara did not answer, but raised the batarang in her hand and placed it in front of Zhang Yi. She knew that Zhang Yi understood the meaning of this thing better than she did.